Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. We're back again with someone from the community, and today we have Susan Brearey. Susan is an artist whose expression is always rooted in nature and her connection to animals, landscape, and exploration. She's exhibited nationally and internationally, is in many private and public collections, and she teaches art both as a visiting artist and as faculty, including over 30 years at Putney School. Her creativity extends to music, performance, co-creating films, and singing. Susan has an upcoming show here at the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center, which opens really soon on June 22nd. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Recently back from Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're glad we caught you in the full flower of everything you experienced there. Going way back, you grew up in Maine,
Mm-hmm.
and you've escaped without a Maine accent, which is remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were a kid, did you spend a lot of time outside? Was nature sort of your friend?
Yeah, I think that's where it all started, because I basically grew up in tide pools.
Huh.
You know, turning rocks over
Yeah.
and finding little crabs, and spending a lot of time on the coast in York County, Maine, southern Maine, in a really particularly beautiful little niche in that part of Maine where there are 14 protected islands, which are part of the Rachel Carson Audubon or Nature Conservancy, I can never remember, Preservation Society. So these islands were just an incredible natural habitat in which to grow up.
Yes.
Because we'd paddle out there or swim, depending on the tides, and have 14 islands to ourselves as kids. I mean, it was pretty extraordinary.
That's
So
unusual.
Birds and deer were all over the islands and still are, and they remain completely unchanged except for tidal rise. But
Really, so when you go back there, it feels the same as it did?
yeah, the towns have changed a bit, but
right.
the landscape, because it's been protected, is largely the same.
You had siblings?
2 brothers,
Older, younger?
one older, one younger.
And what was your home environment like? What kinds of things did you grow up with?
Well, we were pretty active kids, you know, a lot of outdoor activities, and we all skied in the winter, which was a lot of fun. And we had so much snow in Maine that, I mean, I think there's still snow, but then there was just a ton of snow.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have memories of these, you know, gigantic snowbanks, and I don't know if it's because I was so little or if there really just was a lot more snow, but it was amazing, the storms that would come through coastal Maine. But really the summers stick out more because of the coastal environment.
Right.
And really, I think the strongest influence was my French-Canadian grandmother. She brought us music and art. She was one of, I can never remember if it was 9 or 11 children, you know, French-Canadian, very Catholic, no birth control, clearly. And they all worked in the shoe and textile mills in Sanford, Maine, Biddeford, Maine. And her whole family, they just all worked all the time. She was always singing. She played a little accordion. She was just the most fun grandmother you could imagine. And later in life, she drove a little blue MG Midget with blue kind of punk sunglasses and a blue bandana. And it was pretty cool having her as a grandmother.
When you started college, did you go right into art?
No, this is the funny thing. I, because of her influence in terms of French speaking, which it was always sort of a conflict because she spoke with a very thick French-Canadian accent. And in high school, I had an Algerian French teacher who was also our babysitter. She was a belly dancing babysitter. Pretty funny. And she had a very thick North African accent. But I knew there was this place called France and a place called Paris, and I was just, you know, determined to get there at some point in my life to learn this other French. So I sort of can speak many dialects. I have all these accents that I actually know from the time I was a kid.
That's interesting,
But I went to Evergreen in Olympia, Washington, which is a whole other story, because that's when I really got involved in music. But first I was studying French literature, and I actually have a French literature major, oddly enough, because it was a way for me to get to France. Partly, I wanted to study it, but I also, I was always studying French, but I really wanted to go study in Europe.
Yeah.
So Evergreen had this fabulous program in Lyon, France. So my whole junior year was spent in Lyon, living with a French family and learning all about French cooking. I ended up coming back to Evergreen after that year, and I knew there was something more that I wanted to do. I didn't know quite what it was, but I was just more exposed to music because the grunge punk scene in Olympia was massive.
That's right, yes.
You know, really kind of turned the tables in the States. It was just a hotbed of musicians coming in there, and it was a really fun place to be a young person.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Well, or any age.
When you were taking art, which you did at Evergreen as well,
I finally did.
Right, and then you went on to RISD and got your master's there.
Yep.
I'm always interested in, like, who are the artists, you know, that influenced you?
Oh gosh, there were so many. It was really neat being in the Pacific Northwest because we were looking at a lot of native art from the Northwest. And I had great professors. Evergreen was just such a cool place to go to school. Wonderful professors, very accomplished, but very humble. And they weren't about talking about their gallery shows and their collections and all of that. It was just about who they were and what their voice was, and how the way they taught was how to help us find our voice.
As I mentioned, nature is really a big part of what your focus is in art. And you were recently quoting Patti Smith, who said, "Nature is my chapel." And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, because you've done so much art around animals, with animals in them, and I think that part of it is you look at them as spiritual entities that come into your life, that you depict on canvas. Yeah, could you talk a little about that?
Sure, yeah, it is. It's always a very striking moment for me in nature when, you know, everyone that I know and love loves nature, and we walk in the woods and we hike and we appreciate the natural world. And there's something that happens for me. It's not that I'm unique in that experience, but there's something about the awareness animals have of us long before we're aware of them. I love that that sense that when I see them, I know they've already been checking me out for a while, because they're so alert to our movement, and of course they have the sensory. All cylinders are firing with scent and hearing. So there's just this lovely moment of recognition, and then most often they flee, as you know, wild animals do. And there's something about those forms. It becomes almost this emblematic formation in my mind, and I remember it, I feel it, I think it, and I can draw it later. Because I don't take photographs of it. I do sketches sometimes to remember something, but I remember kind of the movement and the grace of their presence. And then when they run or fly, it's just this amazing blur of activity that I just find so beautiful. And they've inhabited this space that is now negative space, but that presence is there. So I try to play with that idea a little bit. And also just the notion that we are, in fact, in their habitat. We are the intruders. So I've just always had this kind of I hope, healthy respect for that other, right? It's not all about us. It shouldn't be, because we tend to ruin things as a species.
Intrude, yes, at least, at the very least. So Sue, when you're observing animals or coming upon animals, you know, because it sounds like you kind of have radar out. When you're out in the wild, you're sensing them, whether they're there or not. You have an awareness that they could appear at any time, right? And right there is a relationship that you're creating. And I know that you talk a lot, and we'll talk more about this in other ways, but you talk about the unseen parts of the world. And as you said, negative space, also, you know, being aware of that, which I think many people are not I think if you take an art class, you work with negative space as well as the object. But I wonder if you could talk about that a little, because I feel like the way you approach art is kind of the way you approach life as well. And trying to capture that, you know, whether printmaking or canvas, it comes through.
Oh, good. You never know what's going to happen on the canvas or in a drawing. If you set out with preconceived notions of an image, I think it tends to falter. It's better to, I mean, at least in my experience, I have some idea, some vague, rough idea of what I want to do, and then it kind of guides me in the process. And that's very much like the experience in the wild, where you have a designated trail or path or some place you like to go, but it's often good to sort of veer off of that a little bit and just take another look in a different, maybe it's climbing a tree, or maybe it's just sitting under a tree and spending more time in a certain place or something like that. Just contemplative time. So it's sort of like a meditation in a way, I suppose, but it's also, when we are quiet, I think, at least again in my experience, being quiet out there, you're more apt to see animals and birds, and you know, there's less of them sort of running away. We're in a quiet space, and they may be more apt to appear. And I do have this uncanny luck of wild animals do appear when I end up somewhere. And in fact, when I got to Rome recently, there was a wild boar not far from the Academy in the park the first day I arrived. And they usually don't run through Rome, but that day they did. And I thought, wow, it's happening again.
Wow.
And when I got home, there was a black bear in the field there to greet me. So I thought, okay, there's just something about the animals, I don't know what it is. Well, but it's so lucky. It's such a fortunate encounter.
Yeah, you obviously have a connection that's really symbiotic for one thing going on. Kind of. And I think that your ability to capture that feeling, but also, you know, some of the paintings of yours that I've seen, you feel the movement of the animals in them very much, and that's tricky. That's really tricky to.
Yeah, because I've never wanted kind of stagnant images, and I think trying to convey some kind of movement kind of leads to the idea of the spirit of the animal,
right?
And myself. I mean, I'm in there, you know, creating the movement. So there's a certain kind of relationship there. I can't really put words on it, but I hope it's in the painting.
Yes, so. There's you, there's the animal, but there's also the space between you and around you.
I like those liminal spaces. You know, like anytime too when you're on, you know, the edge of a field, for example, or right now on our land in Putney, it's loaded with sugaring, you know, the tap lines.
Yes.
So there's this sort of geometry happening in the woods that I don't, you know, I've done some drawings of it, just sort of mark making, conveying that idea of space, how it kind of frames the landscape. But I'm always curious how the animals are moving around these tubes and buckets and things.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's another kind of liminal space where also our impact is evident, but I always find the natural world more profound.
And again, you know, just going back to being able to capture that movement, when people buy your paintings or your prints and put them on the wall, I think one of the things is that's part of what's on the wall, is the movement.
Yeah, and it's been really nice because collectors have told me they never get tired of looking at them.
Interesting, yeah.
And that's such a lovely compliment, because there are a lot of collectors who buy art purely for the monetary value. They end up storing it in warehouses. They don't really live with it. It was all just commodity driven. And I've been really fortunate in that the collectors who've bought my work have continued to buy it. And whenever I see them, if I'm lucky enough to, they'll say they never get tired of them.
Yeah.
And they'll see different things in them at different angles, or
Right.
you know, walking by it,
Right.
something will strike them.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's really neat. And I also do a lot of layers, which helps
Yeah.
in the end too, because when you have a lot of layers in an image, there are often things peeking through that you might not have seen
Right.
at first viewing. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like to play with that idea too. There's a history in the making as much as there's a history in the process
Right.
of finding the image.
Yes, yes. And
in my mind.
speaking of history, Lascaux, going to Lascaux was a big influence for
Yeah,
you.
that was huge. Probably that was a signifying moment, because I was in my literature program in Lyon, and it was really lucky, one of these serendipitous things. Dartmouth College was also in Lyon at the time. This was 1985. And there we met them at a fountain some crazy night out on the town, and these students were hanging on this beautiful fountain. And I thought, oh, figures, it's Dartmouth students. You know, we were the cool evergreen students who you'd think would be hanging on the fountain, but in fact it was the Dartmouth students. And I thought, yeah, Animal House, of course it's them. But it was really funny. They ended up becoming friends, and they said they were going to Lascaux. They had a huge bus, and there would probably be room if some of us wanted to go. So I got to go on that trip, and we were, I believe, if not the last group, the next to last group that was allowed into the original caves, because they ended up shutting it down because of the humidity levels and just human breath. Having groups go through there was affecting the surface of the stone walls and the pigment. So they built a simulacrum museum, you know, down the road, which is very strange. And not the same, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know, it is strange. I mean, I understand them accommodating that, and give them kudos to them for doing that. But yeah, for you to be the last ones, that's really remarkable.
Just so incredible. And just learning about pigment, and every color you're looking at is ground from the rock you're standing on.
Right, right.
And they were so beautiful, so minimal in terms of the drawing, obviously, but something that idea of the emblematic image really stuck with me, and has kind of persisted.
Followed through.
These years.
I can see that. I can see that.
There's a connection for sure.
Sue, at some point you start getting interested in performance, a kind of performance, and you collaborated with Tim Erickson, who is an outrageously amazing musician, in something called Pumpkin Town. And it was described as Americana through the looking glass, where the village may be imaginary, but the music is real. And you had a whole, actually did have, there's a little film that's available.
There is, yeah, it's on YouTube. It's called The Magic Lantern Along the Pennine Way. And this was a little, officially, I believe it's called a dramatic short, 13 minutes long.
Yep.
And it was a really fun project up in the, sort of just north of Sheffield, England, along the Pennine Way. It was about two artists and a musician experiencing this sort of ecstatic landscape with a nod to John Constable and the cloud paintings, because the sky there is so incredible in addition to the landscape. So we were up there about 2.5 weeks making this movie with Dylan Stone, who's a wonderful British artist. And that was, you know, definitely sort of an offshoot of Pumpkin Town, which is very different than that little film. That film was, in a way, sort of celebrating the magic lantern and the painting of the images.
Yes. Because
there are a lot of shots of Dylan painting the slides, and I think I paint a few in the film too. And it's very tricky working on these tiny 1 by 6.5 inch glass slides, and you know, I'm used to doing big 8-foot paintings, and you have to really focus. It's like doing etching with a fine, a needle and a plate. So you have to take little tiny brushes, because when it's magnified through the lantern, if you're not quite precise, it's incredibly blurry and you have to redo it. If you just Google the magic lantern along the Pennine Way, you would definitely get it. And the music is beautiful.
The music is beautiful and really the whole thing is beautiful and interesting and a little surreal. It's very cool.
Thank you. There's a lot of magic lantern stuff out there, surprisingly. Tim and I had gone to a conference of magic lantern people outside of Boston, and it was just astounding, how many people were there, how many of them knew these things like the back of their hand.
Interesting.
And had projectors and slides just to share and trade. I don't really think they use them ever. Well, I don't know what they do with them, but it was quite a display of magic lantern.
You never know, do you?
Extreme tinkerers in the magic lantern world.
You're talking about how you have radar for animals, and you have like a boar coming to you in Rome, and things like that. You've also had great fortune in people, and people coming into your life. I know. When I was working in Putney at the bookstore there, you brought Alexandra Fuller into our lives, and she was kind enough to do a reading, and she wrote this great book called Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight, which some of you are probably familiar with. An amazing life. You've also met Isabel Huppert, the Black Keys, Lubash Malina, who is extremely well-known banjo player, among other things. And even sometimes the alphabet works for you. And I wonder if
in seating charts,
if you could tell that story.
Well, I was invited to an event through RISD celebrating the art of Sean Scully, who is a wonderful abstract stripe painter, just beautiful painterly blocks of color that create this gorgeous rhythm on the canvas. And he had come to RISD when I was in graduate school. And it was just an event celebrating his work and his life at the Drawing Center. And I had no idea what a swanky event this was, and ended up picking up my cousin on the West Side Highway. She'd been swimming at the Y and had a black Speedo bathing suit, and just happened to have found a piece of spandex that morning, and she sewed a little skirt. She's also gorgeous and could wear a trash bag and look great to go to any event. But we pulled ourselves together in my car, went into this event, and ended up sitting at a very fancy table. And it turned out that Bono was the guest speaker. And I saw a little name card that said B-O-N-O, and I thought, right, this is going to be some performance artist who's going to come in pretending, they're U2's lead, oh God, Turned out this entourage came in, and it was Bono, and he was just extraordinarily wonderful.
Oh, great.
And gave one of the best sort of artist talks one ever could.
Very cool.
About music and painting and connecting the two. And it was just really inspiring. And it ended up being this crazy weather night in New York City where the skies opened and it started pouring. And a bunch of us ended up on the roof later, and it was very funny because they had metallic furniture. You couldn't see really if it was concave or convex, and they had all filled with water, but it was still, it was like the quiet after the storm. So we all went to sit down, and of course had this tidal wave of water. In my cousin's case, it didn't matter because she was in her bathing suit and spandex, but he was drenched, I was drenched, and it was a good laugh.
Oh, that's funny.
We had kind of a bonding moment over that. And then this was right before we were headed to England for this Pennine Way film. He was super interested in it and the magic lantern.
Oh, cool.
He had a friend in Ireland, a musician who I had listened to back in the 80s, the Virgin Prunes, this guy Gavin Friday, who's a pretty big name in that world, the punk world. And he wanted me to get in touch with him to maybe do some music for the film. So he created this really cool contact in my life.
Yes.
And it's not like we're friends and hang out. We met this one time, but it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it was all because you were seated alphabetically.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
And I was trying to change my table too because I wanted to be with the people I knew there. So the whole thing was hilarious.
Yeah. But also serendipitous. Again,
it was
a great moment of that.
It was really fun.
So you've got a collaboration coming up at Brattleboro Museum an art center with an old friend of yours.
Yeah. Dwayne Slick. We would have met at the Vermont Studio Center many moons ago, right when I was out of college and he was starting grad school, and he was working with themes. He's Native American. He's Meskwaki from Iowa, and I just thought his imagery was so incredible, and just there's such depth there in everything he's saying and painting in connection to the land. So we just sort of forged this cool friendship.
The curator had this great quote that I'm going to use because I just think it's so lovely. It says that you both are making work that deepen your practice in personal myth-making and connecting with the non-human world. And that phrase of personal myth-making, I think is interesting and goes along with the idea of, or what you do is your interest in liminal spaces.
Yeah, I loved what he wrote, and I think Dwayne and I both do that, in fact, and it's just nice to see it articulated in words.
Yes.
Because as artists, of course, we're not so good with words. We're creating our own language with the painting. But yeah, I mean, we're really different, and yet there are these commonalities with, I think, shape, form, light, this gray zone between abstraction and representation. Both of our images are, I like to call it the gray zone. They can go either way. And the layering, the way we're using materials I've always sort of looked at his paintings for a long time to try to figure out what he's doing. He has all these secrets, and they're beautiful surfaces. Even if we're portraying just a bit of this beauty or mythology or spiritual essence of form, in some way, maybe that makes one think about the world a little bit differently.
Right.
Which I hope is what good art does. As a maker of things, you never quite know what its life will be. It may just be in storage, or you may be fortunate enough that it is exhibited and someone actually wants to behold this thing you've made, and then, or it's seen in a show like this at the museum where you really are touching people on a broader scale.
It takes so much to put on a show.
Yeah.
All of
It's
these things,
huge.
all these things that you have to think about, and the interaction between things.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I'm waiting right now for some frames that I found at a junk antique store in Rome, because they're part of the show, so I really need them to arrive.
Oh yeah, you do.
For the Rome pieces. Yeah.
We'll cross our fingers for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the other great thing about the Brattleboro show is that Pumpkin Town people are going to be there, so there will be some music going on at the same time and a backdrop, and it's going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing.
Yeah, I'm so excited that DJ Hellerman wants to include our Pumpkin Town 9-foot by 6.5-foot backdrop that I painted for the show about our imaginary village is actually going to be in this village in a real museum show.
Oh, that's so great.
And Tim and Peter will play a bit of the opening ceremony on the 22nd. So that's going to be really fun.
Sue, this was really fun.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was great having you on the show. I really appreciate your point of view and the stories that you bring with you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. So the show, June 22nd.
Yeah.
See you there. Thanks to all of you for joining us today with a really interesting show with Sue Brearey. Another look at things, another perspective of how to be in the world with nature and with each other. So we're grateful to her for coming on. Also, again, the show is up at BMAC from June 22nd into, I think, October, maybe.
October 20th.
October, so well into October, but get there. If you can get to the opening, that would be wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. We so appreciate you being there with us, and keeping in mind that Brattleboro Community TV is for all of us. This is our TV station, so if you have a great idea of producing a show or coming up with an idea to do a show here, you are welcome to come and bring that to us and talk about what you'd like to do. And we'll always keep an eye on what's happening, all the different shows that are on BCTV. Thank you so much. We will see you next time.